along with notes, questions to ask your family, things like that, as you study through the Bible with your family. We've got The Puritan Hope by Ian Murray, Revival and the Interpretation of Prophecy, going back to, getting out of our modern context. Let's go back a few hundred years. How do people view what the future is going to look like? I think it'll be a good read. And then, Dr. O, you might be able to tell a little more about this one, because I see you have this one, right?
If I have it, I have it ready.
Okay. So Be Thou My Vision is a liturgy for daily worship. This guy, Jonathan Gibson, he's got several of these for different times of the year. But I have not done this. I have it. We haven't went through it yet. But it's a 31-day liturgical guide designed to enrich and focus your daily devotions. So if you're looking at starting family worship, or want maybe what a good liturgy or a good outline for family worship would be every day, this would be a good addition.
Maybe. I think it's pretty tough.
Well, that's so, and that was good. I think you have this book, because I think we've had a conversation about it.
I tried to use the one for the Christmas season.
Yeah.
And it was too complicated.
Yeah, so it has a call to worship, adoration, confession, assurance, creed, and catechism. So this might be something that is either advanced level family worship, or something that you pick what you like and go on, unless you're trying to do a 2-hour family worship every day. All right. Ooh, Lucian. There you go. We like to treat our guests well here. Where's he at? There he is. He's hiding. Austin. Yeah. So we've got we're going to live stream the message. We've got a little intro. Not music, it's not.
We have a world to win. Do not think that I'm standing up here this evening saying that all is dark and gloomy and we should circle the wagons and just wait for the second coming. No, we have a world to win. We have nations to save. We have dragons to fight. And it can be done, but it cannot be done in the power of a man. But it can be done
If you liked that, you can tell me. If you didn't, you can keep your opinion to yourself, because that took me way longer than it should have. I'm not very technologically gifted, so that was something I spliced together, and even though it might not seem like a lot to you, I put a lot of time and effort into that. So today we're going to talk about the culture and how we can respond to the culture. So we're going to give a couple different approaches, and then talk about maybe finding a middle ground somewhere in there. We don't want to go too far on one side of the road, too far on the other. Try to find a good middle ground there. So our culture, I don't have to tell anybody this is pretty obvious. What was once a Christian nation is now a backslidden, even if we're a backslidden Christian nation, our culture is pagan. The culture that predominates the American people right now is not what the nation was founded on. If you want a quick synopsis of what the nation was founded on, several months ago we did a men's breakfast where we talked about the mission of the state, and I went back to a Supreme Court ruling from the late 1800s where it talked about where the Chief Supreme Court Justice explicitly stated that America was and always had been a Christian nation. So don't let anybody tell you that we were never a Christian nation, because we were. And maybe there are some remnants that where we still are. But our culture now is mostly pagan. So as we, as Christians, want to respond to this culture, we're going to put up a couple people as kind of guidelines or models for how they went about their fighting with the culture. If you can go to the next one. So the name of this message is Benedict versus Boniface. And Saint Benedict, Saint Boniface is where that comes from. So this is why we have to have this discussion. This is our White House. This kind of represents everything that we stand for in the country, and it has obviously been conquered. This is a quote from President Biden. On this Transgender Day of Visibility, we honor transgender people who are fighting for freedom, equality, dignity, and respect. We also celebrate the parents, teachers, coaches, doctors, and other allies who affirm the identities of their transgender children and help these young people reach their potential. Transgender children are some of the bravest Americans I know, and our nation and the world are stronger, more vibrant, and more prosperous because of them. To transgender Americans of all ages, I want you to know that you are so brave, you belong, I have your back. So if you ever thought that Joe Biden was a good Catholic president, that should throw that out the window. But America has been, at least in some sense, culturally conquered. So how are we going to respond? Next slide. So Saint Benedict. We give a quick background on all three of these guys. So Saint Benedict was he was a guy that was born in the 5th century. He started, if you ever heard the term, a Benedictine monk. That comes from Saint Benedict. He started monasteries. I know there's at least a dozen, and I think he moved to another part of the country, part of Italy, and started some more. I'm not sure what the final count came to be, but he's well associated with monasteries and kind of this monkish seclusion from the rest of the world in an effort to make a really pure Christian culture in one little spot. So Saint Benedict also, kind of for our talk today, he was born right at or immediately following the fall of Rome. So you have someone who's born right as, Rome might be the greatest empire the world had ever seen, and he's born right after it. So how does he think, after this breakup happens, what does he do? He pulls back into seclusion and starts monasteries to, again, maintain this pure Christian culture. Next. So now, on the other side of that, St. Boniface. So he was actually a Benedictine monk who, when the abbey of his monastery passed, he was expected to take the position. But rather than take the position, he ended up leaving and becoming a missionary to the Germanic pagans. Now, the pagans had been pretty hard to evangelize up to this point, and they had, if you're familiar with Thor and Loki, that was kind of their mythology that they believed in. So they had this one specific oak tree that they used for worship. They called it Donner's Oak, and they believed it had something to do with Thor and the thunder god, and that if you touched it, you'd be struck down. So rather than maybe what a lot of people would do today and be really nice to the Germanic pagans and respect their religion, he grabs an axe and he takes the axe to the Donner's Oak and chops it down. And as the story goes, when he had started to chop it down, a great wind came and ended up blowing the tree down. But, you think, well, that's going to make them Germanic pagans pretty angry, right? They were so in awe that the God of St. Boniface, allowed him to cut down this tree and not be struck down. They ended up converting to Christianity, and St. Boniface took that tree and built a church out of it. So that's a pretty savage move. That's pretty cool. And then just for us here close to Louisville, if you're familiar with Germantown, the part of Louisville, obviously historically a heavy German population, this is St. Boniface Cathedral in downtown Louisville. I don't have an affinity for the Catholic Church, but I do have an affinity for Catholic churches. And I haven't been inside this one, but I do like to go in cathedrals whenever I get the chance. So I've drove by it, and it's pretty cool. Might be something to check out one day if they're open for tours. But so last person we'll talk about, King Alfred the Great. So I had mentioned to Dr. O that I wanted to do a message on this topic at least 6 months ago, and in between that time and now, there's a website called the American Reformer, kind of beat me to the punch, I guess. They wrote an article called "Fortress Building in Negative World," and they call their model the Alfred option. There's a great book called The White Horse King, written by Ben Merkel, and it's all about the life of King Alfred. He was the brother of the rightful king. His brother died. He ends up becoming king. He is the last kingdom standing on the island of Great Britain. Everyone else has been conquered by the Vikings, and he even at one point has to flee his kingdom and retreat back to this little island in the middle of a river. And this is where, I think it's called Athelney, was the name of his little island. And from there, he made guerrilla warfare attacks until he could build up another army and go in, and he retook his land and ended up almost completely driving out the Vikings from the British Isle, and then I believe his grandson finally pushed them all the way out. So we've got our two options here. Or three options, sorry. We've got St. Benedict, seclusion, kind of defensive. You've got Boniface, who goes straight in, chops down their oak. And then you've got St. Alfred, who during a time of tactical withdrawal, I'll call it, he pulls back, gathers his resources, and then once he's got the resources to make a legitimate effort to fight, then he goes back out and fights. He wasn't looking to withdraw forever. It was a tactical withdrawal to a better position. So one more thing, you can go to the next one. I don't remember what the next slide is. So again, it's a castle. That's not an important slide. So one thing I want to talk about is, you can go back one real quick. One thing I want to talk about as we think about the world that we live in, there's a guy named Aaron Wrenn who's broken down the world, the American world, into three different categories. He calls it positive world, neutral world, and negative world. So he says the positive world was pre-1994. He says, I'll just read you his definition. He says, society at large retains a mostly positive view of Christianity. To be known as a good church-going man remains part of being an upstanding citizen. Publicly, being a Christian is a status enhancer. Christian moral norms are the basic norms of society, and violating them can bring negative consequences. So from 1994, in the past, positive. It's a positive thing that you're a Christian. From 94 to 2014, this is what he says. He says, society takes a neutral stance towards Christianity. Christianity no longer has privileged status, but is not disfavored. Being publicly known as a Christian has neither a positive nor a negative impact on one's social status. Christianity is a valid option within a pluralistic public square, meaning that there's a bunch of different religions all giving equal space and opportunity in this area. Christian moral norms retain some residual effect. So that was 94 to 2014. And now where we find ourselves from 2014 on to the present is negative world. He says society has come to have a negative view of Christianity. Being known as a Christian is a social negative, particularly in the elite domains of society. Christian morality is expressly repudiated and seen as a threat to the public good and the new public moral order. Subscribing to Christian moral views or violating the secular moral order brings negative consequences. So as we think about our options, and we think about our life now in this negative world where, and one distinction that he does make, he says that this isn't a broad paintbrush you can cross America with. If you go to New York, it's going to be much more of the negative world than we have here in Kentucky. If you go from Louisville to a smaller town in Kentucky, you're going to get more of a positive world down there. It might not be fully positive as it once was, but it's not going to be the same across the entire world or across the entire nation. But we do firmly find ourselves, as you can go, think back to the slide I showed you of the White House. We're fully in negative world. Legitimate Christian morals are no longer the standard. It's whatever you think is best, I guess. So which option is best suited for our current situation? I would say the Alfred option for sure. If you have, so monkish seclusion only works if the enemy won't pursue you. So not only do we have the Great Commission that says, therefore, go, meaning you're going out, not drawing in. If your goal is to only draw in and never go back out, then I think you're in violation of the Great Commission. If you have a enemy that is willing to say, yeah, you stay over there, and as long as you stay over there, that's fine, then this monkish seclusion is fine for a time. However, if you can think, the Obergefell decision, I believe, was in 2015, and they were fighting just for homosexual marriage. And then you fast forward not even 10 years later, and look at what they're pushing now. They weren't fine, the ploy was, we just want to have homosexual marriage, and then after that it's done. And now they're trying to groom your kids. They're trying to make, especially states like California, make it to where your child can transition without your input. That if your son comes home one day and he's had a teacher that told him he's a little girl, and he says, you know what, I do kind of feel like a little girl, that he could somehow go about transitioning to a girl and you would have no right to say anything about it. They're literally stealing your children from you. So we don't have an enemy that's willing to not pursue us. That we have an enemy that is going to pursue us until the plus in LGBTQ plus is the norm. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with what the plus stands for, but there's a reason they use the plus sign and not a P, because it's pedophilia. Or now what it would be called is minor attracted persons. There's two cures for that: the gospel and something else. But we don't want to get to that point. We don't want to let it get to where the plus is the norm. After that, America is far gone by that point. Now, the Boniface option requires cultural capital that I don't think the American church has right now. We don't have the resources required to engage on an open battlefield with the culture. If you even think about media, when's the last time, and I will say this is beginning to shift because of the internet. The internet has given people who are really talented but don't have the vast amount of resources that Hollywood does to make legitimately good Christian movies. But if you rewind like 5 or 10 years, what was like the most popular Christian movie? Like Fireproof or Facing the Giants, and it's called Duck a Duck. How cringy were those movies? Like they might have had a good message, but that was not a good movie. No movie critic is going to sit down and say that was a really well-made movie. That was really over the top. There was no subtlety. There was no good plot line. We need to get back to where we were when you had C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, who were giving these really well-made stories that had Christian themes kind of infused into them. But we don't have that cultural capital right now. We're on the run basically in this culture. So I don't think the Boniface option is a good option right now. We don't have the cultural capital to do so. If you're familiar with Louisiana, so we can't even. Christians across the nation would say they're anti-abortion, but there was a law that was set to pass, had support to pass, that would have made equal protection for fetuses in the womb, babies in the womb. It basically would have applied the murder laws of Louisiana to a baby that's inside the womb of its mother. And it was actually Christian organizations, Right to Life organizations, that wrote to the senators and told them not to pass this law. If we can't even come together on something as basic as human life, as basic as abortion, then we've got no chance once we get out to the more, arguable points of theology. So we don't have the unity, we don't have the capital for the Boniface option right now. So I would recommend the Alfred option. So this is some of the things that I would talk about. It's fortress building, hence the castle. It's a fortress building that the church is what we draw back into. We don't, pull back and be like the Amish and live in some, community as far out in the country as we can get. This is a fortress that we use as a tactical point to not only train ourselves by coming in and hearing the preaching of the word, but raising our children up, in the fear and instruction of the Lord. This is our fortress, and we need to make sure we're building it. Now, secondly, is we need to become anti-fragile. Now, some of this is already true, and now I'm going to make a leap here. I should have checked this before I said it. The church owns this land, right, and the building, like debt-free, all that stuff. Okay, so I assumed that to be the case. I probably should have fact-checked that. But that is part of being anti-fragile. If you're a church that's a new startup and you are renting a space, you might have somebody, if a liberal landlord comes in and says, you're not going to say these things, or I'm going to cancel your, whenever you come to renew, I'm not going to renew your lease. Being anti-fragile is owning space, is making sure that as best as we can, we are not reliant on the culture. We are stable within ourselves. So again, business owners, we have several business owners at least that I can think of off the top of my head in this church. And not only do they make Christian employment possible, but then, in the future, the 3-year plan of the men's ministry was this is the mission of God. Next year is the mission, the man, the method. So the mission, it was all this year. Next year's going to be the man. It's all going to be personal devotions and kind of character building. And then last year is going to be all apologetics, with the goal that after that 3rd year, we can go to the city council if there's a bill that needs to be argued, and we have the abilities and the people trained to do so. But how much more is that effective if not only there's 5 people who own 5 homes in Bullitt County, but you've got 5 business owners who own 5 businesses and pay heavy taxes when they go to the city council, and now they're arguing against this bill. It's all about acquiring assets, acquiring land, being anti-fragile. Jesus says to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. I think a lot of people divorce the first half of that from the second half. It's like you can't be wise and innocent, apparently. We need to take whatever assets we have, whatever gifts we've been given, and then make those effective for the kingdom of God. And if you own a business, that is God's business. If you have children, those are God's children. You need to be raising them up, knowing that they are God's children and will one day be arrows that you shoot out into the pagan culture. Third, so again, this is kind of what I was talking about, preparation to contend for the faith in the public arena. Like I said, that goes hand in hand with the businesses. It's whatever you can do to have the most impact when it comes to these city councils, the mayors, whether it be, the sheriff's office. Because I heard someone say this, and at first it took me back, because I was like, that's dumb, that doesn't make any sense. Somebody said, it matters more who your sheriff is than who the president is. And the way that we think is like, no, the president's, he's the most powerful man in the world. Like he matters the most. But what is he gonna? He's not going to be the one that's coming to knock on your door to take you in on a warrant. If they pass again like the COVID thing, if they try to pass something on the COVID or something similar to that, and you have a sheriff that says that's not constitutional, I will not enforce it. It matters more who your sheriff is than who your president is. So we need to make sure we're wielding within our little sphere of influence. We need to wield as much power and assets as we can. So growth, but not sacrificing unity. We need to begin to connect with other churches who are willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with us. And we have been seeing a good amount of growth here at Bullitt Lick. But and I'll come back to this. We can't let our policies be numerically driven. It needs to be, we are message driven, we are, principally driven, and then we pick up people as we go because they say, yeah, that's exactly what I think. I want in on that. Not, let's get as many people as we can in here, and we'll try to, figure it out as we go and figure out how to play along with everybody. And then lastly, just prepare to be uncomfortable. At the end of the day, there's going to be anyone who seeks to live a godly life is going to face persecution. That's going to look different at different parts of the world, different points of your life. It's going to feel differently, but just get ready to be uncomfortable. If you're always looking for comfort, then you're probably not doing the will of God, because the will of God for your life is not comfort, it's faithfulness. So if you can think about where we're located, this is important. This is something we were, providentially gifted. There are other churches who might have the same abilities and the same vision that this church does, but they're in a location that basically doesn't matter. That is not the case here. So there's a book written by Doug Wilson's dad. I think his name was Jim Wilson, but it's called, this one was written by Doug Wilson. It's called Rules for Reformers, and it's a spinoff of Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. And he basically this was the guidebook of how we lost America, and he takes all of his principles, flips them to Christianity, and he says, this is how we take it back. One of the things that he keys in on is location. Location is key. That's why Doug Wilson's father, Jim Wilson, ended up in Moscow, Idaho, because it's directly in between two colleges, and it was a small enough town that they could actually have an impact. Like if you take the Tim Keller approach and go to New York, Tim Keller, controversial, figure towards the end of his life, but how much of an impact did he have on New York? How percentage-wise, how much of New York did he take back? Basically none. It's too big of a target. However, if we have a city just outside of a major city where a church like this size could actually have an impact, we get college students from different parts of the country that we can come in, help grow them in the 4 years they're here, or maybe they decide to stay and they stay longer. But then if they do leave, now they take what we've given them for 4 years and they go to different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and they begin to teach that to other people. So not only are we tactically located to Louisville, we also have a seminary that is giving us people to train. So I think we are providentially gifted with a really good location to be effective. So then kind of some things we need to think about as far as if we're going to, right now in this stage, we need to come back and start building this fortress. Where do we start? Eventually, our foundation is ourselves. You can't start looking at building the church if you're not working on yourself. So personal piety. If you go back to the Alfred option, in those days, the king was expected to be on the shield wall. And that's how they fought. You have this army would put up their shields, this army would put up their shield, they would come and meet, and then that's how they would fight. It wasn't today where, you're 200 meters away, popping rounds at each other. And it definitely was not. It would have been completely foreign to them that our generals were thousands of miles away across the ocean from where the actual fighting was going on. In the Anglo-Saxon culture, the king was expected to be on the front line with his men. Otherwise, they wouldn't follow him. So we are lucky enough that we have elders who are leading the charge. We have, Dr. O does not shy away from saying hard truths in the pulpit. I remember having a conversation with Dean one time, and I believe this is maybe after I preached or something. I talked about, how thankful I was to have found this church, because I really believe that this was a church that would suffer through persecution and not cave. And he said, I think somebody asked him, like, if the two options were preach the gospel or jail, we're all going to be sharing a jail cell together. So we have elders who are willing to lead the charge. They're willing to stand on the front lines, and we need to be willing to follow them. But again, you're no good to your elders if you're not working on yourself. Personal piety and character building is a must. Don't run away. Don't shy from a fight, but we need to make sure we're preparing for the fight before we get there. We're to be as bold as a lion. And then big thing, and I don't think you have to worry about this here too much, but just don't assume that someone else at the church is going to take care of it. If you see something that needs to be done, or see something that could be shored up, maybe you see it from a different angle than someone else does. They just didn't think about it. Reach out, offer to help, just take care of it. Check with the elders maybe before you do something crazy, but just be willing to go ahead and do it yourself. Don't expect that, I'm not a deacon here. I don't have a ministry here. I just sit in the pews on Sundays. If you see something, say something and do something. That way we can take care of our church and make sure that we're still progressing. So personal piety, and then every home a training ground. This is family worship. This is correct ordering of your family. Your marriage needs to set an example for your children as they grow up. Because, I see it all the time. I know Josh sees it. We make domestics, and it's just them playing out what they've seen the entire time they've grown up. This is what family looks like to them. It's just dysfunctional. So if you grew up in a dysfunctional family, change it. If you didn't grow up in a dysfunctional family, be thankful and continue to grow that. But set an example for your children so that when they grow up, they don't look at what's going on in the culture and think, oh, this is normal. They should look at you and then look at the culture and they're like, this is a better option. I don't know what that is, but something's not right about that. Lastly, as far as every home a training ground, and this one's going to be the kind of controversial one, but Christian education. I believe it is the duty of every father to bring his children, this is a command, this is an explicit command, to bring their children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But I believe it is a duty of every father to give their sons and daughters Christian educations. And you say, well, there's not a specific text that says don't send your kids to public schools. However, I'm going to give you 3 texts that I think you can round out to a pretty explicit reason not to. Luke 6:40, a student is not above his teacher, but everyone, after he has been fully trained, will be like his teacher. Deuteronomy 6:4-9. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh is one. You shall love Yahweh your God, and with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand. They shall be as phylacteries between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And then lastly, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So you look at those 3. The first one, he's talking about that whoever your child's teacher is, that's who they're going to be like. And if you send your kid to public school, they're going to end up like a public school teacher. Now, we have some great public school teachers in this congregation, one of them being Chris Miracle, who is trying to, bless his kids. He started like an FCA at the church or the school he's at. But I was in the Sunday school one time, before Isaac and I started one, I was in Mark Mitchell's class, and Chris Miracle's in there. And I said something about public school, and, I wanted to caveat and say, I'm not talking about the teachers. I'm talking about the school system in general. And he was like, whoa. He's like, we homeschooled our kids. So you have somebody who works in the public school system and recognizes that it's so bad that they're not going to send their kids there. So just make sure you're aware of who your teacher is and who is training them up, because that's who they're going to be like. The Deuteronomy passage. Basically, this passage summarized is you should speak of God in everything you do, in every way, every day, everywhere you go. As Dr. Rose put it before, that whenever you speak of spiritual conversation, the temperature of the room shouldn't change. It should be normal that you're just going about your day, you're in the kitchen, and you're speaking about something about faith, something about God. It shouldn't be like, the kids get all weird and then they start kind of like scurrying off. That should just be normal. And that can't be true if you're sending your kids off, for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and then having them come back and, maybe even if you do family worship for 30 minutes a night every night, that's still, the dynamics of that time differentiation is insane. And we're going to talk about that in here in a second. Lastly, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So discipline and instruction of the Lord. Discipline is the Greek word paideia, and instruction is the Greek word nouthesia. Paideia is this, if you do a word study on it, it says the whole training and education of children, which relates to the cultivation of minds and morals, and employs for this purpose now commands and admonitions, now reproof and punishment. Nouthesia is properly setting or placing the mind through God-inspired warning. It says improves a person's reasoning so they can reach God's solution, i.e. by going through his thought process. And if you think about going through the thought process, your instruction, your training up your child should help them think as God would think. And you think about public schools today, for those who went to public schools, did you ever have a logic class? I went to a private school and I didn't have a logic class. We weren't even taught how to think, much less think like God. If you read Proverbs 8, it talks about Lady Wisdom. It's a poem of Lady Wisdom. And she is saying that at the beginning of the world, God used wisdom to create everything that we see. Wisdom was there with God at the beginning when he created the world. And so there is a very specific wisdom that is ingrained in everything we see. Every part of life is ingrained with this very specific wisdom. And that is not what we're getting from the public schools. If we're getting wisdom at all, it is not the wisdom that God used to create this world. So this was the startling part for me. So I'm a cop. Average police training to be a full-fledged, non-probationary officer is 3,000 hours. The average journeyman license for an electrician is 8,000 hours. A master electrician is 12,000. So it takes 3,000 hours to train somebody to make life or death decisions like that. And we obviously know that that's not, a one-year officer is not the same thing as a 15-year officer. But that's our standard. You have a journeyman and a master. You have a journeyman that can work with things that will easily kill him if he does it wrong. That's 8,000 hours. You have a master electrician who can now run a company where he employs journeyman electricians, and that's 12,000 hours. All this to say, students in public schools spend an average of 1,000 hours a year in public schools. And that's K through 12, that's 13,000 hours. So if you just do the math on certifications, we are getting a master's degree. We're getting a master's license in what secular culture wants us to believe and know. So now the next one. And if you still think, this is, I've heard a lot of people go away from the term public schools. They say now government schools, because public would mean that it's for the people, it's for the public. But really it's not. It's the government schools. And this is the number one, depending on what list you look at, number one or number two biggest textbook publisher for public schools. And this was what they had on their website for Pride Month. So if you think that this pluralistic society is all fair and gives everyone an equal shot, it's not true. This is explicit, on their website. This is what they're promoting. This is the values they're trying to instill in children. But McGraw-Hill education is the thing, if you want to look it up. But they're very proud of their stance on this. So all this to say, I'll give the caveat. Like I said, I don't have an explicit command not to send kids to public school. But I do have commands of what education, Christian education, bring up your children look like. If you can square that circle, then that's on you. But I'm not going to take that chance. I'm going to raise my children up, hopefully in the Proverbs 8 wisdom that that God wants. I want to help them think like God and actually be able to think. If you deal with a lot of juveniles today, logic is not only something that's not taught, it's something that's not attained. A lot of people today, they hear something once and they think it was their own thought, but it wasn't. It was something they heard and they're parroting it back. So, like I said, that one's a little controversial, but that's something to think about as we talk about making our homes fortresses. So now, every church a fortress. So this one is, again, where we're providentially blessed. So hard truths must be taught from the pulpit. Thorough discipleship is a must. Again, we don't want as many people as we can get in here and then try to figure it out. Once they're members, now we'll try to figure it out as we go. We want to preach biblical truths because that is going to keep the right people in and the right people out. We don't want such a big tent that now you've got fighting inside the tent. We want to be focused outward. We want unity in the tent, and then we're looking, we're standing on the castle walls, and we're now focused out, not worrying that, my buddy is going to stab me in the back because we hold a different eschatological position. We will lose our culture if we grow numerically and do not disciple our new members. The world will be changing us. We will not be changing the world. So that's something that's important. So as we bring in, that's why I was very thankful when Dr. O shared that when you got baptized, Johnny, you said, now it's time to learn. Exactly. That's the right attitude. It's not, now it's time to change this church into what I want it to be. It's, recognize that you've got Dr. O who's been preaching for close to, 50 years now? Pretty close to it. And we need to learn from him, not try to come around and start changing everything to our preferences. The term semper reformanda, it means always reforming. So if it's a tradition, if it's anything that happens in this church that is not explicitly founded on Scripture, then we need to at least take it back to Scripture and make sure that it doesn't violate something, that there's not a better way we could do it. So we always need to be reforming. We're not, set in stone. It's like, well, all the Reformation in this church took place over a decade ago. Now we're good to go for the rest of our lives. Every part of our doctrine, every part of our practice needs to be taken back to Scripture. So training up young men to go out and contend for the faith. Like I said earlier, we have a good crop of young men. We have really gifted men in this church. That there are people within this church, many people within this church that you would not find one of in most churches, and we have them in plurality. We have not only our elders, but you think about someone like Gary Belk. Gary Belk would be a unicorn in a lot of churches, and here, he's Gary Belk. He's a very gifted man, but he would be an elder at most any other church because he is dedicated and he's knowledgeable. And then again, you have Dr. O. The last sermon I preached was on Psalm 110. I had a question on the Hebrew. He hooked me up with Dr. Fuller, who's a Hebrew scholar, and we probably only talked for about 5 minutes about what the Hebrew meant in this passage. We talked for about 15 minutes about police work and Dr. O. And this is what he told me. Because I expressed my thanks that he was willing to give up a very prestigious job because he wouldn't compromise on his principles. And he said, well, Jim had a lot to do with that. He said, Jim was like a rock. He said, he did a lot to encourage me. So you've got somebody who's a doctor who gave up a position, and we look at him and think like, man, that's the epitome of faithfulness. And then he looks at Dr. O and he's like, that's the reason I did it. That's the reason I was able to remain faithful, because I had somebody that was willing to come alongside me and encourage me. So we've got good leaders. Again, we've got Dean back there who said, if it's jail or the gospel, I'm sitting in a jail cell because I'm going to preach that gospel. And then you've got Jim Bob, who's the manliest music minister in the world. There's the nation or world? World? Okay. So I want to make sure I got the right title there. But then again, as we raise up our children, we're teaching the next generation to love what is good, true, and beautiful, and to hate what God hates. I grew up in a church where if you said you hated anything, that was, hate was like a cuss word. Well, it's a biblical word. You need to hate what God hates, and you need to love what God loves, because there are things in this world that are worth hating, and there are things in this world that are worth loving. If you even think about just an example in your own life, I love my wife. Anything that endangers her well-being, I must hate. If I don't hate it, I don't really love her that much. If someone is trying to take her life, and I'm not willing to say I don't hate that person, I hate the sin, not the sinner. If I'm not willing to say I hate that person for being willing to take my wife's life, then I don't truly love Morgan. I'm soft. So we need to love what is true, good, and beautiful, and we need to hate what God hates. And then last thing, and then we've got a couple just slides to go through, but not everyone's called to the same role in this project. Not everyone is going to be a warrior. Not everyone's going to be a monk. Everyone needs to be kind of a warrior monk, though. You need to have enough skills and knowledge that you're able to fight. If someone comes at you, then you need to have the biblical knowledge to defend your position, to defend and contend for the faith. But at the same time, not everyone is called to be a mouth. It takes all different types of people. It takes hands. It takes feet. We're a body. We're not all one body part. So don't think that I'm telling you that, in 3 years you will be staying for the city council, contending for the faith. And that's not what I'm saying. But you need to be doing one or the other. You need to be training to either go out and contend for the faith, or trying to figure out what you can do within the church, within your family, within your daily life, to continue to cultivate godly character, and then give that to your children, and then out into the church. So, 2 things. This is the Cologne Cathedral in Germany, the St. Vitus, I don't know how to say it, in Prague. I told you I have an affinity for Catholic churches, but that's not why I'm using these as an illustration. There's a very specific reason. If you had to guess, how long does it take? 'Cause now we can throw up a building in like 2 weeks. I think they built the rally in Shepherdville in like 3 days. How long do you think it took to build these? Any guesses? Say again? 10 years? 150? 500 plus years for both of them. Both of these, from start to finish, took 500 plus years. We think too narrow. We think too short term. We have to think like the Catholics that built these cathedrals think. They thought, I'm going to start this project, and 10 generations from now, maybe my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren will have finished it. Maybe. But either way, we're still working for the Lord. We're working in the same direction. We're working on the same project. So that's what we need to do here. We need to start the project now so that maybe generations from now, they can finish it. Next slide. So, and this is a video. This is, I don't know if the sound will play, it's not important, but try to read the bottom part. That's Willie Robertson. Took me like 5 times to watch this video before I finally saw him. So the reason I showed the video was start with 2 people, now ends up with, I don't know what the count was, 20 plus? 36. There you go, 36. That's how normal people change the world. We don't change the world through going and getting some super fancy degree and writing a book. Although books, the pen is mightier than the sword, books are insanely important. I'm reading a book on the Crusades. The Crusades were fought with swords, but they were started with words. It was all about, I believe it was Pope Urban that went around and he called for the crusade, and he rallied men to come and to fight for the Christians in the East. So while the wars are fought with swords, pens are very important. But this is how normal people change the world. Probably no one in this congregation except Dr. O is ever going to write a book that a bunch of people are going to read. But everybody can raise a family. Everybody can raise their children in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. This is how we change the world. Is that the last slide? Okay. So that concludes the talk. The Alfred option. So we might, in this culture, we might be coming back and tactically withdrawing to the church, where this is a training ground, where we raise the next generation so that they might go and continue our work. And I'll end with one little tidbit that I noticed as I was studying for this. Saint Boniface, if you remember, I think I said this at the beginning, he was a Benedictine monk. So you have Benedict, born in the 5th century. He was, let's pull back. Let's be kind of secluded. Then you have 200 years later, Boniface comes out of that order, and he goes and chops down Donner's Oak. It takes both. We can't say it's one or the other. It takes both. They have to have somewhere where they can train and then be sent from. So let's make sure that we're doing what we can to send our men out into the world, that we can fulfill the Great Commission, that we can go get a people for God's glory. All right, let's pray real quick and we'll get out of here. Dear Heavenly Father,